Welcome to Boswell and Books and Company's joint virtual event series, Readings from Oconomowaukee. I'm Daniel Goldin from Boswell. It is day 5,193. Today is a wonderful program, and to give you an introduction is Elisa Baudoin from Books and Company.
Thank you, Daniel. Welcome, everybody. We are hosting Susie Luo today. She's a writer based in New York. She holds her JD from the Cornell Law School and has worked as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. But during this time, she attended fiction workshops and wrote this book, Paper Names, at night while she was working all day. This is her first novel, and we're so excited to have her. J. Ryan Straddle calls Paper Names empathetic, propulsive, and timely. Luo's confident plotting shines in the story of three Americans attempting to redefine themselves in a changing country as the past and futures collide. A magnificent debut. And if you'll remember, we hosted J. Ryan at Boswell Book Company and at Books and Company for his new novel, the Saturday night at the Lakeside Country Club. I'm messing up big time.
Supper Club.
The Lakeside Supper Club. I don't know where I got Country Club. Anyway, so welcome, Susie. We are really thrilled to have you. Do you want to start by giving us a little bit of an elevator pitch and a flavor of the book by reading, a few pages?
Of course, and thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting. Paper Names in Paper Names, we follow the lives of three New Yorkers over the course of 2 decades. You'll meet Oliver, a handsome white lawyer who lives in an exclusive luxury building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, his doorman Tony, who's a Chinese immigrant, and Tony's daughter Tammy, who's working on reconciling her own American upbringing with that of her parents. At the beginning of the book, an attack happens that intertwines the 3 point of views together, and we stay with the characters over the years as they share their secrets with each other, help each other up the ladder of the American dream, and make decisions that completely change the course of each of their lives. And I would love to read a little bit from the book. It's near the beginning. This is set in 1997. And it's from the perspective of Tony, who is a Chinese immigrant who has an engineering degree, but from China, but currently works as a doorman at a luxury building on the Upper West Side. He's on the subway, and just so you know, Kim is his wife. So above him, colorful subway advertisements ran along the wall. A narrow neck bottle of sparkling water designed for the bold since 1981. A flower delivery service guaranteed to make your wife fall in love with you all over again. And an antidepressant that declared a new dawn. None of those ads appealed to Tony. Tap water served him just fine. Kim would kill him if he wasted money on roses, and he didn't have time to be depressed. Another banner with faded black lettering warned that skipping fares on the subway could result in an arrest or fine. That one made Tony pull his jacket snug on his shoulders. Above ground again, Tony checked his pant pocket for his wallet and felt a hard object lodged underneath it. A glass containing a dark horse powder and labeled Cat's Claw, immunity booster. Kim had purchased it on her weekly visit to the traditional medicine man on Casino Boulevard. Sprinkle some in your coffee, she told him as she unloaded the rest of her purchases onto their mattress. Valerian root and passion flower for sleeplessness, ginkgo and pennywort for brain boosters. Natural remedies are the secret to a long and healthy life, she said, as she gazed at her collection of tiny corked bottles. Her nonsense powders. It was her way of staying close to her occupation in China, a medical doctor whose practice had been solely grounded in science. During the early 90s, a wave of Chinese immigrants turned their back on their old careers and descended upon the States as an army of software engineers. Anyone could quickly learn to speak in ones and zeros and single-word functions and semicolons. Tony still didn't understand why Americans themselves didn't want such high-paying jobs. Kim guessed that it was too much work for too low of a profile. Regardless, they saw the opportunity and crawled through that hole to America. Neither of them regretted their decision, but it didn't mean it was easy to live with either. In China, they had everything, but by way of a trusted grapevine, they learned that everything they had was better in America. In America, middle-class people could afford to live in single-family houses instead of cramped apartments. They didn't only have a washing machine for laundry, but a dryer and a dishwasher. Indoor heat was theirs to adjust, not controlled by a building's stingy landlord. Still, the most memorable comparison they had heard was that in China, they could only spring for cake with cream once a year, but in America, they could eat it every week. A block away from the Rosewood, an older gentleman in a three-piece suit cursed into his cell phone. The man growled, "I don't care if it's before 6 a.m. in Los Angeles. He works on my time." A woman with puffy eyes wiped her nose on the sleeve of an oversized sweatshirt. Her face, sallow, carved with a desperate loneliness. Tony shrank as he passed her. What a strange land, he discovered. He had witnessed children screeching profanities at their nannies, protesters marching with signs to arrest the nation's president. Americans had no shame, no commitment to public decorum. He admired them. They were fearless. They were real.
That's a great place to start too, because it really sets the tone for the comparison between where Tony and Tammy come from and where America's at, and how we evaluate the American dream and how we view it as a place, but once we have it, we're settled.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like Tony they came here thinking that, and yet he's observing these places where things aren't quite so settled with people who've been here a while.
I feel like the American dream was definitely on my mind while I was writing this book. Also because I think that was something my family and I were trying to achieve. And I feel like at the end of the day, Paper Names is a challenge to the American dream. Like, what is the American dream? It's like this promise that if we work hard, we'll land a prestigious job, make a lot of money, buy a house, a car, have 2.5 kids, right? That doesn't sound like a dream to me. It sounds like a checklist.
Yeah.
And I feel like all three characters in the book actually do accomplish a lot of what's on this checklist, but they actually still find themselves unfulfilled. And I think because, like, to me, the real dream of America, and I kind of wrote it into that section that Tony is realizing, is that America is a place where we can be our full selves, right? We can love who we want. We can believe what we want. We can say our different opinions. And that itself is such a luxury and a privilege that not every person in the world has. And I think because we have that privilege, we owe it to ourselves to redefine what that dream looks like to each of us. Like, what would actually make us happy, not what has been like kind of part of propaganda to make us think that we are happy.
Yeah, what's supposed to make us happy versus what really makes us happy.
Yeah.
I like that you set that up right away with this, because it's going to be good to have the rest of the conversations. Daniel, go.
Oh, I was just curious. You said you had thought about this with your family. Did you, obviously this is completely fictional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all disclaimers in there, but did you find there were elements of the story? For one thing, when you talk about the part of China they come from, it's very distinctive and probably different from a lot of, I read a lot of, I really like Chinese American stories a lot, and this was just a different, I didn't really know much about Dalian, and I actually just went on this rabbit dive. Like, this is one of the big tourist attractions in China, and and it was really interesting for me because it wasn't American tourists, it was Russian tourists, and so tell me, were there any elements of the book that you pulled from in your own life, knowing that everybody is fictional, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and I love the disclaimers, so I don't have to say them.
We're here for you.
One of the greatest things that came from this book is I got so much closer to my parents. I think, so I was born in China and I came to Flushing, Queens in New York with my parents when I was 3.5. And it was a really hard time for us, like a lot of trials and tribulations. And I think when you're going through it, you don't obviously have time to reflect on it. You don't, also at that time, mental health wasn't something you discussed at all. And especially in Chinese culture, it's not a popular topic. But I think while I was writing the book, I would just phone home a lot. I would just say to my parents, like, do you remember when you first came to Flushing? And like, my mom did work at a bakery, even though she has a medical degree from China. And I was like, what did you feel? And they started opening up, and I started learning so much more about my parents. So I'd be like, why did you even leave China? It sounded like you guys had like a really nice life. And they started like wondering, yeah, why did we leave? Like for this like hard life in Flushing. And I think that's what's so powerful, like so selling about the American dream too, right? Like even from a different country, they had heard of this dream that you can accomplish only in this country. And so I think a lot of it was based on my own raw emotion at the time and their raw emotion. And kind of like from that foundation, I built the plot and these characters to reflect what we really did feel. And I hope that's what the readers feel, that, like you said, even though this is fiction, it really, the heart of it is true.
Yeah, it feels like while there are, I'm just going to say, there are exciting secrets and suspense elements in the story, it's really Tangheng or Tony's, the family story about him kind of trying to make terms of it, and Tammy also trying to make terms of it of separately of the family story that really gives the story the heart, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely like the quieter moments that give it its beating heart. And I actually this is a different version of the story. I actually sold it's the same book, same characters, and the characters are actually exactly the same as they are, but I actually 2 weeks before heading into production, I cut 20 of the 28 chapters and I rewrote from scratch like 20
I
new
heard
chapters.
about this.
Yeah.
And now you're gonna tell us.
Wow.
The thing you didn't say was what did you cut? Like what was gone?
So one of them is a major spoiler, so I won't say. I could tell you guys after the show.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but you know what happened is, like, as I kept reading the book, I think, when I wrote the first draft of the book in 8 months, and that was just like, I think just too little time to really, I think, understand the characters. And then when my editor was editing it, I had a few months away from the book, right? So when I went back to it, I started to understand who the characters were more, kind of see the plot in a way. I think the first version was had much less plot and was much of a quieter book. And I think it was like a risk, but like at the end, it's like a little more, the plot's more explosive. And I think why I wanted to do that is I just want to challenge these characters, kind of like take exactly who they are and put them into a higher like level where they had to really operate and like show who they were. It was not going to be an easy decision for them. Like it had to be more difficult. So that was exciting for me. And I think I got to put in also more of Dalian and China. So yeah, one of the characters was supposed to die very early on in the book. So that's a little spoiler.
Well, I thank you then, because I really like the China parts of the story quite a bit.
Me too.
I also think that you work, like the way that you parallel like they seem so different, the two families, but you show that in some ways they're both having to confront the same issues. Certainly Oliver has his own sort of past that he has to reckon with, and one of the things that it feels like you kind of keep looking at different angles is sort of almost the morality of the American dream, and how these people have to sort of figure out, as somebody who has had already, I think you're on your third career, sort of, and you're a lot younger than I am. So you've had this idea of contemplating, and I know many people like that, where you look at your job and you think it's going to be one way, and you're like, it's kind of not what I expected. Did you that yourself in that? Yes.
Yeah, I think why I like these three characters together is I feel like in some ways from the outside, like from Tony and Tammy's perspective, Oliver is the American dream. right? Oliver and his family, like that's what they symbolize. And even like throughout the book, Tammy and Tony still kind of like give Oliver always the benefit of the doubt, or there's always like, because they view it from the outside. And what I loved showing why I had Oliver in the book was almost to contrast him with Tony, to be like, oh yeah, Tony thinks he's so great, but actually inside Oliver has his own problems that, like you said, are very similar to Tony's in some way. Like they're both trying to figure out how to be a good person and how to be a good person in this country. And Oliver also assumes things about Tony, like, oh, he's just a doorman. But actually, Tony's much more than just a doorman. You know, like we all are more than our jobs for sure. And it was just like interesting to see how they changed each other's perspectives, and how I feel like when I see other people, it's kind of like, you know, you see somebody on stage and you're like, oh my God, that person just has it all together. Like they just have the perfect life. And now I'm just like, no, they probably also have problems, and maybe they're even more serious than mine. I don't know if you guys have ever felt that way with like, yeah, feeling this disconnect with your life and someone else's. Yeah.
Well, sure. That's the reason why I sometimes read the TMZ column. You
Yeah.
know, I just want to know.
You're like, thank God someone has it worse than me right now.
Like, oh, another problem for a star.
And
So, go on.
I was just going to say, I kept thinking of Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson too, which reveals these pleasantries and unpleasantries of the 1%, you know, and it just, you're dealing with class in a lot of different ways too, as well as the American dream and expectations, and just familial love and space, how we, and, you know, we want more for each other in a family, but that more may not be what that person wants or needs.
I agree. It's Pineapple Street's a great, like if somebody read Pineapple Street, this would be a great book to hand sell, and I will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you read it?
Yeah, no, it's on my list, and multiple people have told me to read it, and I'm like, maybe Oliver could belong on Pineapple Street. That's like, I don't know if you guys agree, but like, I feel like he could find his little space on that street.
Yeah. Maybe. But it's interesting because there are these themes that keep, you know, how when you're reading books, you think, I'm not reading any, you know, I'm just reading randomly, and you're like, wow, these books just keep visiting the same theme over and over again. And this idea about the money, we just, another book that came out this spring that I enjoyed is called Fifth Avenue Glamour Girl. It's a historical novel about, from Berkeley, about, from Renee Rosen, about Estee Lauder. And it, you know, she basically came from a very working class background and had to kind of break in the beauty industry, and everybody almost everybody is like complete fakes. And in the same way that they're selling this artifice, they have all these secrets, and the author told it through the story of someone who has a terrible scandalous past that she's trying to cover up, just like Oliver. You know, and it's New York, so maybe that's what everybody, you know, you should just assume that somebody has a terrible scandalous past, and I think we'd all feel better about ourselves if we make that assumption.
That's so interesting you bring up that, like, you know, so many, I think every book kind of touches on money, and I'd love to hear your opinions on it, but it's like, I'm just thinking out loud right now. I feel like in some ways, like the heart of the American dream is greed, right? It's like, we just want more, always like more money, more like things. And in some ways it's hard for us to break that addiction, because even if we say money is not important, like you still always need it. So it's like, it's hard, you can't go cold turkey on money. Like you're still gonna always need it. And like, I feel like we all have our own unique relationship with money. Like, and at different times in our lives, we can see it differently. Like sometimes it's like, oh, I'm just in a very generous mood. I want to make money to help others. And then other times it feels like I need to keep more. Yeah, just like was wondering like what you guys thought about.
Well,
yeah,
it's
that's
so,
the theme. Yeah.
You know, in that the Maslow scale of the needs and the
Yeah.
wants, and you sort of float in from you're thinking need, and you're like, actually, I've gotten to want, and I didn't even know. And you know, it's almost and sometimes, and it's so easy for people to keep going. It's like, I have enough, but maybe I can have a little more. I mean, there's so many, one of the things that I thought about with your book is the move that many families, immigrant families and other families, working class families, the move from Flushing to Scarsdale. And they're like, we're going to have a better life. But what it really does is it puts them against people who have a lot more. So what they have, because Tony's move is he is the American, he just goes job, always moving up the ladder. And yet he puts himself in a place where he doesn't feel like he's accomplished as much as he would have if he'd stayed in Flushing.
I heard this great kind of joke one day. It was like, an investment banker finds a fisherman in a village, like seaside village in Mexico. And the investment banker is like, we can really make your fishing business like big. Like, we can first hire more fishermen, and then you can manage all the fishermen. And then then the Mexican fisherman's like, okay, what's next? And the investment banker's like, okay, so then we could take it global. We can have it in all different places, and you'll be the CEO, and you'll be working until then we can IPO the company, et cetera, et cetera. And then the fisherman's like, okay, and then what happens? And he's like, and then you can retire on your money in a small fishing village in Mexico. Right? It's almost like it's always like we think we want so much more than where we started or where we are. And that's something even now I try to remind myself, and my friends and I are always talking about it. Like, I'm on my second book and I'm like, I need this book to be better. I want it to be of course that's a natural feeling, but it's almost like I don't want to forget that for all its flaws, Paper Names is the book that saved my life. It gave me this life into writing that I otherwise could never have made the transition to. And just I think it's hard for us as humans to balance planning and wanting with appreciating what we have and knowing we have already everything we need.
And the wanting and the achieving is how we measure success. And that is not really what determines that interior success. So it's
or happiness.
Our happiness. And we use money as a measurement when it's not very accurate or achievable. Yeah. Because you talk too in the book of the quiet moments in which those happiness and the happiness and the memories and the closeness and the community are created aren't around a whole lot of money for Tammy and for her parents. And then you look at it's hard because I don't know where the spoilers are going to be or not be. But Tammy gets in a situation where things are happening around her on such a large scale and such a large moneyed scale. And she's like, well, I guess I'll just show up. She's integral to it and she's just going to show up. And there's no buy-in. There's no, but there's a lot of money.
She also does long for, she's like, what was wrong with Flushing? So she doesn't, when you're, sometimes you don't always, you kind of grow into the wants and stuff. I think she is, she's a smart character. She does chase it. She does, she gets the great boyfriend, the wealthy boyfriend, and she gets the really top-notch job. But I don't really know, she has to come to terms with that, doesn't she? I just want to say, I read when I was reading the book, I'm like, PS 146, where is that? And I was like, it's off. Of course it's Flushing. So but it's not very specifically right off of Union Turnpike. And I was like, I know, I think I used to take the Q44. I think I walked by that school. I think I might, like I said, I haven't been in Queens for a long time, but my family.
How long were you in Queens?
From birth. My family moved there in 1949, and I'm the third child. And we lived further out. We lived where to be specific, if you know Queens at all, where the Long Island Expressway met the Cross Island Parkway. So it's really best straight, not really that far from Union Turnpike. More so that's the next big street, kind of. What is that, south? But I would actually walk all the way into Forest Hills sometimes. or take the bus or something like that. And I lived off of Queens Boulevard by myself for a while. So no, this is all territory. And my family was I know downtown Flushing very, very well. So, that's the bus, one of the buses we take either Jamaica or, and saw the transition. I'm in my 60s. And so
wow. You actually look not in your 60s at all. Yeah.
But we have always really enjoyed the varying cultures of Queens, celebrated all over, and so that's been a nice.
Even now, when my parents, I live in New York City now, but when my parents come to visit or my sister comes in, they're always like, should we go to Flushing? Because that's where all the great Chinese food is. Or the other day I was down in Chinatown walking around with my sister, and I was just like, there's just no other feeling than like a place like this that just feels like home, or like everything. It almost like doesn't feel like New York City in some way. It's like its own little hamlet.
Well, it doesn't. I don't know what it's like now, but I always felt like when I was very young, we could drive and park and go to the Chinatown in Manhattan, which we did every week. But by the time I was an adult, we couldn't park anymore, and so we would just drive to Flushing, or sometimes take the bus, or sometimes walk. And but you wouldn't have the tourism that you have, So it felt like a more authentic experience. So,
and it's so interesting that those are the places that we go back to remember home, but we move away from to measure success.
Do you think that maybe like sometimes it's like that's the journey humans have to go on? It's almost like, I get asked a lot, like, oh, because I was a lawyer and then a banker and then a writer, and some people are like, oh, do you wish you just got your MFA? Like, do you wish you just like knew right away? Because in some ways it's like I lost all this time that I could have been writing, in these other jobs. And I always say no, because I think if I were a writer right away, I think I might like watch Suits or Billions and be like, I wonder what a life as a banker would have been like, or like life as like. But it's almost like I don't have to wonder anymore if this is the right life for me. I really feel like this is, because I was able to try out these other kind of costumes. Right. Yeah.
Classically, when I was growing up, like the great writer, their bio wouldn't be, I went to college and then I got my MFA and then I started as an assistant professor. They'd say they were a long haul trucker and a waitress.
I love that.
That's the best bios. Like I worked in a hair salon and then I worked in a mine, like a silver mine. And the fact is that you had your own life experience that you brought to it. And if you didn't have it, you would just be writing childhood novels and classroom
like
novels.
High school. Yeah.
Although, and so you have this world to draw on.
But when I read, like what I'm really focusing on now is like reading almost not for enjoyment as much for craft. Like I want my writing to get better and better. And I feel like MFA programs, that's what's so great. Like they, a lot of people come out of those programs and their sentences are just like poetry, and that's like a skill. And I think that was hard for me when I first started writing. I was like, I wrote all my life, but actually I didn't write,
Well, you're having your own you're doing your own self-education now. I love MFA writers. Very big fan of many of them. But one of the problems in an MFA program is that you're always doing short stories. Like you either have some people have a novel in progress, but it always gets based down to short stories. And so a lot of MFA, not all of them, but some of them have trouble moving to the novel, whereas people without writing degrees tend to just start to jump right into the novel. And that's complete generalization, and it's not fair to anybody,
and we're not going to quote you on that.
And thank you. And there's lots of caveats, but I think
I'm gonna quote this.
Daniel's going to get all kinds of letters from people.
He'll go viral.
Programs.
I love them both, but the world needs both writers.
That's and if it's a different experience. What was that moment where you decided to make the jump, that you had this novel in you and you were going to try and do it?
So
I mean, was there
yeah.
a moment?
Well, and then just noting, you said you wrote it in 8 months. You weren't writing, like sometimes their first novel, I was like, yeah, I've been working on this for 15 years.
I did write, so when I was at Goldman, I did write one other manuscript for 6 months before this novel, but I actually always had this relationship or friendship between a doorman and a resident of a wealthy building in my head. It's just every time I said it out loud, people were like, oh yeah, great premise, like slowly. They all meant well. They were just like, we don't understand the premise. And I didn't either, because I didn't have these characters. So for 6 months, I wrote a very plot heavy book. And I edited it, and I afterwards, I remember reading it and I just didn't feel anything. So actually, I went back to paper names because I was like, I just need to write the book that's still on my mind. After writing a whole nother book, this is still the book I want to write. I didn't have it outlined. I didn't know these 3 characters that much, but I just knew this was it. If it's been on my mind for that long, it had to be in my mind for a reason. And I started writing paper names the first month of lockdown. So I think that's why I was able to write in 8 months with a job, because I didn't have to commute to work anymore, right? I could I would stay up really late writing, and then in the morning I can kind of just like dress up the top half of me and like roll onto Zoom, and just that energy, like the subway actually takes a lot out of me. I think it's like, it's not the subway, it's just like the city, the commute in the city. It's like a lot of people all around you, and I have become more of an introvert in my life, so I feel like that just zapped my energy. But now that I could be at home, I kind of channeled all my anxiety around the pandemic into this book. Like, I feel like that's why I say like this book kind of saved me, because it's like even during that time, it allowed me to not just eat everything I baked, and so I wrote it, and I did feel this like, I feel like COVID, everyone had their unique experiences with it, but one thing it taught me is I felt like my mortality is real. Like, I think this is how the world's going to work, but then a pandemic hits. Like, nothing is really stable. Like, no job is like actually stable. Like, your life is finite. And is this, like, working as a banker really how I wanted to go out in life? If I don't know what time I'm going out, like, who do I want to be? So I think that was really driving me to 8 months. Like, anytime I was tired to write at night, I'd be like, well, you might not have all the time in the world to write. Like, you don't know how much time you have left, so just keep going, And after the 8 months, I was just very tired. I don't think I could have really done any more at that point. So I cold emailed some agents that I had Googled. And I actually landed my dream agent in a week. I think we talked about it all the time. Like, I think she just was like not that busy that day, and like saw my email and was like, oh, what's this? Like,
That's true. That's such the truth.
Yeah.
Like this, there's just that moment you're open and you can take something new in, and boom.
Or like, and in that moment, maybe it's like she wanted a story like this, or it's like all of the stars had to kind of align with timing. And then she sold the book about a month later, and then I left Goldman Sachs 2 weeks later. And so I don't think I could have left my job without having sold a book for a certain amount of money, or with some kind of proof of concept.
Right. Right. Well, I don't think you can go back, because your vision of investment bankers in the book is like.
Well, the
No, I'm just
second
kidding.
book,
You can go back.
the second book is based. It's more in an investment bank. So
Yeah.
I always joke that I have to get another job soon, because the third book, like, unless it's going to be about a writer, like, I'm going to need like.
Well, you
more
don't really
content,
have you don't really go. There's not. Is there a
There's
law?
not too
There's
much
no
law firm.
No.
Oh, they're
But
all lawyers in this book.
They are lawyers, but they're lawyers in doing deals. They're
Yeah.
dealing. They're dealing.
Yeah.
So
wheeling and dealing.
yeah, that's it's close to home, because my family is my part of my family does a lot of dealing. So
Oh, really?
yeah, they're also yes.
I feel like in the second book, I am more investigative of that dealing.
Okay, good.
than the
Well,
first
oh
one.
no,
Yeah.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
there's plenty of investigating in this book too. But I was thinking to myself, gosh, I hope they're not like this person. They aren't. They
Oh
are
no,
fine.
they're not.
They're fine,
They're not.
upstanding, wonderful people.
Yeah. I
I
used to
love
be
it.
one of them.
And you were too. You were talking about somebody else.
Yeah, they're all fake people.
Right.
No.
Did we mention that? I think we
Yeah.
mentioned. I want to talk about names. It's in the title. I love, as Westerners, we don't really think about like this idea of renaming the way, and I think when even some other immigrant cultures, you take that name and that name is gone and this is your new name. But
Mhm.
I know there's a long tradition, especially in Chinese culture, of having sort of multiple names. That's come up in, like Western, like you can take a
Yeah.
Western name and then you're like, I don't like that Western name and I'm taking this Western name. Or when my nephew was living in China, there was a fad of 2-syllable first names as opposed to 1-syllable
Mhm.
first names. And so a lot of his friends, his Chinese friends would like say, well, I'm going by this now. And whereas, I was like, I went, Danny, Danny, Daniel, there wasn't really like, they don't mean anything different. That's not there. But yours take on the names in the book take on symbolic heft. I would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, I've always felt like names are so integral to identity, and they're kind of given to us randomly, right? Or at least we didn't choose them. And we use these names that were given at birth to sign all the important documents of our lives, like all the papers. So I feel like our given name to me is like our government name, our paper name. And all three characters in the novel actually change their paper name, like some to hide from their past, some to assimilate into society. And I just really want to explore what that kind of does to a person and maybe what would make them want to reclaim their paper name. So I think the idea came from, so my given name is Shinshin Law. And now legally that's my middle name, Shinshin. But when we first came to the States, that was my first name. And we were in Flushing our first week, and my mom went around introducing us to all the neighbors. And a very well-intentioned old white lady was having trouble pronouncing my name. So I would be like, oh, my name's Shinshin. And she'd be like, what? And I'm like, Shinshin. And after a while, she's like, oh, Susan. And that literally became my legal name and my name from then on until high school, when I remember like in middle school starting to chafe against the name. I was like, I don't know why we just like chose this name, and I felt like Susan, I didn't feel like a Susan, it wasn't like quite right. And we moved towns right before I went to a new high school. So I was like, I'm gonna go by Susie now. Cause at least I feel like I've had a choice in the name a little bit. And I was like, and at least I feel like more of a Susie than a Susan. No offense to Susan.
No. But
Yeah.
do you know the Whitney
Yeah.
Houston song? There's
No.
a Whitney Houston song called "My Name Is Not Susan."
Oh, really?
Yes,
Maybe
you
that
gotta
has
you gotta go
always
listen
been
to it and
in.
dance around to it.
Yeah, maybe that's been in my radio frequency and slowly influenced me. But I do like when I tell this story, like after certain events, like people come up to me, they're like, "Oh, actually, I was given the name Catherine and I didn't like it, so now I'm Cat." Like it's almost like when you're given this name that it's like you start with a name that you're given that you didn't have a choice in. But then like when someone else gives you another name, I think then you're just like, you start to be doubly offended. You're like, oh, everyone seems to know what I should be called, but I really now want a choice. And insofar as I can on what to be called.
Can I tell you? I
Yeah.
have been renamed by other people twice. So my parents called me, my given name is Daniel, but my parents always called me Dan. And then when I was in first grade, this is a very popular name when I was growing up. There were 3 Daniels in my class. My first grade teacher lined us up in size place and said, the shortest person is Dan, the tallest person is Daniel, the middle person is Danny. I was called Danny for the next 20 years because of my first grade teacher. I got to my first job in publishing, my boss, a dear woman, kind of a little tough, but so, and who had her own name issues, which I will mention in a second. She said to me, Danny is the person in the mailroom. You're Daniel. And I mean, literally, actually,
Oh my God.
there was someone
Yeah.
in the mailroom named Danny, but that was both literal and figurative when she said that to me. And so I became Daniel, and that's what I go by. So the weird thing about her renaming me is she changed her name multiple times. So she was her name had been Ling Ling, and then she went to a numerologist with another woman I worked with, and they changed their names to get better numbers. And so she went to Ling, and like I say, I love this person dearly. And then finally one day I looked, for some reason I had her driver's license because I worked for her and I was doing something or other. And I was like, I looked at her, I was like, your name's Phyllis? So that's another story. So once again, I am well aware.
Well, my paper name's Patricia Louise. That's what my parents named me when I was born, because
Really?
I mean, it's a longer, they were expecting a boy. My dad played on the college basketball team he played on, won the national championship 2 weeks before I was born. So it was all parades. I was born, didn't have a name. My grandparents, who were bossy, said Patricia for my mom, Pat, whose name's Patricia, and my dad's name is Lewis. So I was Patricia Louise, and my mom said, I hate it. We're calling her Lisa.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me
Wow.
that your real name was Patricia Louise.
My real name is Patricia Louise.
But what's on your drive? Did they change it?
No, my driver's license, Patricia Louise.
Oh my God.
Wow, that's so.
And I've gone by Lisa
what do you
ever
feel?
since.
Do you feel any kinship towards that original name?
Patricia Louise, no, and I've never
Yeah.
felt like a Lisa either.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Rename in this house. What do you want to be called from now on?
Yeah, what
I
would
don't
you?
know. I have no idea, but isn't it? I mean, it's interesting.
back
So
to us.
Yeah.
the first day of class, the teachers would call Patricia, and I'd be like, "Oh, wait, that's me."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm Lisa. Yeah.
So yeah,
That's so
it is-
interesting that we
naming
all
is
share this.
interesting.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
I was going to say we do have to talk about books. You were talking about Ryan Straddle, J. Ryan Straddle, and how he was on the cover of the Ark, and we had the quote, and I really picked up your book because of that quote, because I love him so much. I love his writing. Everybody's reading Saturday night, Lakeside Supper Club. Here, if you ever come to Wisconsin, you'll have to go to a supper club.
I have to show you. This is literally on my desk.
Oh,
So I have a bunch of books on my desk, because when I write, sometimes when I feel block, I just open books I've read and just like kind of go into be like, okay, I remember he wrote this chapter, so I can write mine. It's kind of like just stealing inspiration in some way of like, but yeah, Jay Ryan's such a good writer.
Well, you'll have to try to make, if you drink, you'll have to try to make a brandy old fashioned and see what happens with that. Or I do like a good relish tray, as does Lisa. So
Yes. Yeah.
that's a Wisconsin thing. What other books have you been enjoying, or other books that were inspirational for you? Like books that have made you like?
I never knew I wanted to be a writer when I was younger. I read a lot. But I remember still the moment actually that I did kind of think I could be a writer. I read these two books back to back. They're kind of different. I read Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn and White Teeth by Zadie Smith. And what really struck me with both of those authors is like, I just felt like it was the first time I felt like these books had such a distinct voice. That like I feel like if I just picked up another book by Zadie Smith, even if you didn't tell me it was Zadie Smith, I feel like after a few chapters, I'd be like, or a few pages, I'd be like, oh, I think I know who wrote this. Like that to me was so special. It felt like so personal. And when I read their books, maybe because it was back to back, I just felt like maybe I had a voice too. and that's something like I love meeting people after events and they're like, oh, well, I'm actually trying to write, or like, I'm a writer too. And it's like, or I'm trying to think like, do I want to write the story? And I really believe everyone has a story they want to tell and everyone can be a writer because we all have this distinct voice. And it's kind of like, are you willing to use it in this way? And you can use your voice in other mediums and like, in totally other ways. But I don't know, just like feeling that you can be out there in the world telling a totally fake make-believe story, but still have your voice there. That was just like a really special moment, I think.
Doesn't it just upset you so much that Flynn never wrote another book after that? I mean,
I know she's working on
Yeah.
one. So I love her whole career, like transitioning from books to like writing her own screenplay, all this stuff. So that's actually why I called she's her agent, Steph Roston, is my agent. And that's why I reached out to her, because I was like, I want this kind of career, this like career with multiple books and also maybe venturing into other mediums. And I want an agent who can take me through all of that. And Steph is like literally the best.
I just get, as a person who loves books most of all, though, I get really sad when someone like Patrick Somerville, who, wrote The Cradle, which is a book I really love, or David Benioff, who, City of Thieves, and I'm like, we're not getting another book from these people because they're so wrapped up in their world of
other projects,
creating great television and streaming and stuff. So some people go back and forth, but I think really the money is so much better in the film stuff that it's got to be just all encompassing. Like it's like all you want to do.
Maybe they're just a building of demand. So it's like when they know, like, when they do release their next book, everyone's going to be buying.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and of course, there are people who make you wait a long time. Even if I don't know what Nathan Hill was doing between the Knicks and Wellness, but there's a book coming this fall that we're all really excited about.
Have you guys read? Oh, sorry.
Go. Well, like Covenant of Water would be something.
Oh, yeah.
And this isn't even the book that was supposed to. I don't understand it. I didn't watch his virtual events, and we didn't get to host him. And I'm like, I don't think this was it's like a different publisher and a different book than I thought he signed when he had that big contract. So what did you ask? What were you asking if we read?
Oh, if you guys have read Patrick Rothfuss, The Name of the Wind, and I forgot what the second one was, like The Doors, something with that. But like
he actually doesn't live that far from us. He's in Stevens Point. Right.
So I have been waiting for that third book. Like every once in a while, I'll go on his website, and like his website will have changed a little, but always be another variation of, I know everybody's asking me for the third book. I'm working on it. Like
it's been the longest. It's George R. Martin, only surpassed by George R. Martin to finish off his series. But I think at this point with him, they're like, we saw the television show, even though yours is going to be different. Yeah. And he's got another book coming out, and it's another novella that has nothing, that's just a
yes, that's what I heard from another bookseller. But I think I loved Name of the Wind, because I think that was a book about names, right? Being like, a stone has an ancient name. Like, so if you call something by its real name, you can have control over it. And I thought that was so interesting. I think that seeped into Paper Names. And I always knew the title would have names in it. And I just, the power of names is so far reaching.
And I also think that how we translate and how phrases are, and you have that in Paper Names too, how some phrases are hard to translate into a different language, the pure meaning of them.
Yeah, they just sound silly. Like, I think,
the art of translating our stories to different languages, not just word by word, but intention and feel and the texture of those stories.
Did you read, can I ask, since it's really about what you're talking about, did you read Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Ree Feng? So that book is very much about, it's an immigrant story, but it's also very much about words and translation and like things. There's a whole chapter about ideas that can't be translated from Chinese to English,
Oh,
It's
I love that.
it's a really beautiful book. It was, I think, shortlisted or longlisted for the Center for First Fiction Prize. She's wonderful. So anyway, back to you, Lisa. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's a perfect example of what I was saying. And Tony had a saying that he was trying to say to Tammy, and the translation was humorous. But
Yeah,
you
the
are
saying
my
was,
liver and my.
Yeah, and so the Chinese phrase is 你是我的心肝, which is like very tender, but in English it's you're my heart and liver. And to, a young girl, she's like, oh, ew, I don't want to be your liver. Like I don't know what that means, like to be your liver. And I
You
remember
don't
I
really
got
want to be
that
a heart
phrase.
either, though.
I mean, that's better, I feel like, than a liver.
I suppose.
Like you're my heart.
The shape isn't as pretty as you think it is.
That's true. That's
Plus,
true.
what's getting rid of your bile? Liver is. I'm sorry. Go on.
I never thought I would be at a book event where the term bile was used, but I'm glad it happened. No, I love it. When, like, I remember I called my dad for that quote because I was like, Dad, what is like the most sentimental thing your mom ever said to you? And it can't just be like, I love you, or like it can't be like something that she says over and over. It has to be that thing she saves for like the moment that she really loves you. That's not that she has to love you, that she needs to express it in a way that only this phrase can. And my dad said this, and he was like, I think she said it to me when I was leaving China. And I just thought that was such a, like, he obviously remembered it all these years later. And even when he said it, I feel like he got teary-eyed. So it's like phrases, like the phrase I love you, I think it's kind of become watered down, right? Where it's like we just say I love you to everything. Like I say it all the time to my dog, and I do love her, but it's like there's got to be a deeper. I feel like we need, like, the human language isn't great at containing all the emotions we can feel.
Yes. Yeah, and we're using fewer and fewer words too to express all the feels and all of the situations too. We need to wish we had livers more often.
Well, they are important.
They are.
You have any other books that you would like to give a shout out for? Oh, can we talk about Katie Rundy? Or is it Rundy?
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Rundy, isn't it?
Yes, Rundy. Yeah, shout out to Katie Rundy and her book, The Shore. Katie was one of my early blurbers. And Katie, if you're watching, I was talking to Dan and Lisa earlier about how, every day we try to write together for a couple hours on Zoom. And Katie's just one of those people, like, she's just like sunshine, and she just really reaffirms in me, like, that people can just be good. So I just want the best for Katie, and I'm so glad that she was, I think, a history teacher or a teacher, a different kind of teacher beforehand. And it's like, that's what's so interesting about the universe. Like, you would never think that someone who was born in America and became a history teacher would ever become friends with someone else who was born in China and became a banker, right? And then, like, our worlds just converged. And I don't know, I feel like the universe is just like a magical place sometimes, and I'm glad I know Katie.
It's New Jersey power. That's what it is.
Jersey is, I live in New York City, and I used to hate the city because as much as people in the city hate Jersey, I feel like people in Jersey hate the city. Like, when I lived in Jersey, I was like, I never want to live in New York City. It's a rat infested, like, everyone's like out for money. Like, who cares about New York City?
There was an article, I think, in the Times, I think this week, about like how various developments have kind of increased the separation between city and suburbs, and they were specifically interviewing New Jerseyans, or that's the wrong term, about how they feel about New York City. So you're right there.
Oh, I need to read it. Yeah. But New Jersey is just such an interesting place, and it's like there's a shore, there's like, North Jersey, and I remember when I was applying for college. Oh, I that sounds familiar. But when I was
south.
Oh, okay, south. Yeah, when I was applying for college, I saw that depending on where you were applying from, which state, you have to apply to a different admissions counselor. But New Jersey was always, so it would always be like Massachusetts is its own state, Florida is its own state. Like, Montana is its own state, but New Jersey got split up to North Jersey, Central Jersey, and South Jersey. I just thought that was so, I was like thinking like, oh, it's because we're so competitive. We're such a good
Very
state.
driven.
They had to like split us up to try to like diffuse the, you know, Jersey power.
So I suppose you haven't done the, you know, I've spent a decent amount of time in New Jersey. My mother's best friend from lived in Morristown, so we would go on a trip to
Wait, so
Morristown.
why did you end up in Milwaukee?
Oh,
Because it seems like everyone is like here.
Yeah, we forgot to mention that. I bookstore. Just wanted to live somewhere else. I lived in New York after college, and I thought I lived in a small town in college, and I thought I want to live in a mid-sized city. I mean, it's so weird. I was working in publishing, and I was touring a book about, it was a rip-off of Places Rated Almanac, and I decided I needed to live in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. And so I actually went and looked at Minneapolis and St. Paul, at St. Louis, and my sister lived in Lafayette, West Lafayette. She was teaching at Purdue. So, well, she said, don't live here, but and Chicago, and I'd gone to Chicago, and Chicago was too big. Chicago felt too much like New York, and there were issues with every place, but I needed someplace a little more underdog, you know. The thing I really love about Milwaukee is that I mean, there's plenty of problems, but it is a little better. It's better than you think it's going to be. And I feel like that is the secret to happiness in life. This is back to Tony moving from Flushing to Scarsdale, is like, you have low expectations that you exceed. And when you live in Scarsdale, it's hard to exceed them. That's a great place.
Well, even when
I know,
he's
'cause my
at
cousin lives
Scarsdale. Oh, yeah. Your whole family is like around this area. But even when Tony's at Scarsdale, like in one of the final chapters, he thinks back about Dalian. And he's like, oh, actually, like, I thought things were going to be so much better here, but like, it has almost the same problems as Dalian. Like, people are behind on their bills here. Like, people are trying to make sure their kids aren't doing drugs, you know, like, and in Dalian, it's like, he just realizes everywhere people are just trying to do their best that they can. And that no place is really better than another place, but you just have to be where you are, I think.
Yeah.
Lisa,
And he
do
has
you have
that
last
final,
words?
oh, I was saying, he has that final drive through town where he starts appreciating all the little pieces and parts, which is maybe what we need to do, is walk around. In fact, I was just walking around my town with my son yesterday, and he said, maybe you should do this more often. You would appreciate it more.
Oh, I love that. It's always kids, I feel like, that remind us of how happiness is really just the most simple thing, right? It's like, oh my God, like I remember I was with another kid, and she just looks up at the sky and she's like, oh, it's so blue. Like, it's like I never think that. Just like, I see the sky every day, and I don't ever comment on it unless it's like an awkward conversation, you know. And then I'm like, oh, the sky, it's really cloudy today.
Yep, all of that. And it's getting a different perspective and getting out of work and walking around and seeing what you have around you, instead of looking outward, wanting more, just seeing what you have around you and walking with it. And I think of Curtis in your book and all of his self-help advice and the Post-its on the mirrors, and you pull all of that together so beautifully.
Curtis actually was a bigger character in the first draft of the book, because I felt like, you know, speaking on mental health in Chinese communities is so hard. Like, even my parents, like, they would reject I think self-help books back then. But I think, like, knowing Curtis always bringing it up, kind of always telling Tony this is an option, is what ultimately I think allows Tony to reach out for it. And I feel like we all need a Curtis in our lives.
Those are words to live by, and perhaps our last words to live by for this conversation.
Yeah.
We all
This is
need a
so
Curtis.
great. Sorry for all the different segues.
That's what we like.
That's what
the
we
way to
do.
go. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really wonderful.
Of course.
Yeah, it
Thank
really
you so much
was.
for having me. And if I'm in Milwaukee, I would definitely let you guys
Please
know.
at least
stop
say
by.
hi if you
Yeah.
don't book an
Yeah.
appointment.
Yeah.
And then take out to the suburbs to Oconomowaukee.
No, we'll drive together. We'll
Yeah.
go visit you.
Yeah, we'll go to Oconomowaukee. Come see the lake.
Perfect. Perfect.
It's prettier, and it's actually the real money's out by Lisa.
Oh, no.
I believe that.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and please enjoy Paper Names. It's wonderful.